Final Fantasy VII Rebirth director Naoki Hamaguchi is a pretty awesome guy. I've been a big fan of him. I think that everything he's been saying really makes sense for carrying the series forward, and I would love to see him work on Final Fantasy XVII. I really want to see another mainline Final Fantasy title come from Creative Studio 1. This is the team behind the remake trilogy, the Final Fantasy XIII trilogy, for better or worse, and Final Fantasy X. This is Square's legacy team, and I think with Creative Studio 3 making Final Fantasy XVI, it's time to see the torch pass back to Creative Studio 1. Well, today, it looks like there's a possibility that that might actually happen. This interview with Naoki Hamaguchi teases quite a lot. But first, I want to save you guys some money on games, because games are so expensive nowadays, and you do not need to pay full price for them. Our sponsor, Instant Gaming, is having their Black Friday sale from November 29th through to December 2nd, so be sure to go and check them out. You can also use a link in the description below to enter our free giveaway. That's right, we're giving away a free game. You simply have to click the participate button, and if you win, you're going to get a free game of your choice. These are games you were going to buy anyway, right? So why not pay less for them? Be sure to check out Instant Gaming with a link in the description below. So the article says, quote, "In the wake of industry layoffs, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth director Naoki stresses how vital it has been to have worked with the same team for the past decade, and how hopefully they can bring that expertise to the next project post Part 3. My team has developed so much together, grown so much, gotten so much experience and knowledge while working on the remake trilogy," Hamaguchi-san told Games Radar Plus at the Golden Joystick Awards 2024, hours before Final Fantasy VII Rebirth scooped 4 of its 6 prize nominations. "We're still working on the third game. That's not finished yet. We still have to get that out the door," he laughs. "Though we do know that Part 3's plot has already been written. When we get to the end of the trilogy, in terms of what the next project that the team works on, I really don't know yet at all. It could be the next numbered Final Fantasy. It could be a completely different brand. We might start up a completely new brand, but whatever it is, I mean, I'm incredibly excited to work on that and see what we can do with that knowledge we built up." Hamaguchi-san showed great appreciation for his team has managed to stick together in the years since Final Fantasy VII Remake, retaining incredibly specific talent amid a spat of industry layoffs, closures, and some of the most expensive studio acquisitions ever, marking cause for concern elsewhere. "I think the reason Sony and Microsoft did that is because of the way game development is now," he suggests, no doubt referring to the increasingly high technical demands, player expectations, and the industry standards involved in modern gaming. Him continuing, "It's just so difficult to make these real, high-end games without having that experience base. For a team with no experience at all, who's never done a large-scale game, just to throw them in and get them to make something is such a difficult task. So I think that's why they went around buying these studios that already had a certain level of experience built up. But certainly, considering that background, my team has been together, the Final Fantasy VII team, for about a total of 10 years maybe, to go through this whole trilogy project, slowly building up our experience and our know-how. The team has seriously learned so much and grown so much during that period," he says, of how valuable it is to retain that talent. "So I think that when we finally do bring the trilogy to a close and get the final game out, we'll be in a really great position to move forward and do something even greater. And that experience is just so key to that, and that we managed to build that up by staying together." So guys, I cannot stress enough how absolutely crucial this really is. I want you guys to really think about something, right? Going all the way back to post Final Fantasy X, right? You had Final Fantasy XI, Final Fantasy XII, 13, 14, 15, all handled by different teams and different studios. All of those games, the only two that actually share a development team is 11 and 14, and even then, Naoki Yoshida came in and a lot of things changed up, and so even then, the FF11 team and the A Realm Reborn team, not really quite the same people. Even with Final Fantasy 14 and 16, yes, you had Yoshi P, you had Mahiro, who had worked on Final Fantasy 14, and Hiroshi Takai, who also worked on 14. But for the most part, most of the team working under them were a brand new team within Creative Studio 3. So it wasn't like, you know, they just pulled everybody off of Final Fantasy 14, or everyone within that studio was working on both titles at once. The team working on Final Fantasy 16 was its own team built from the ground up, and it had some overlapping staff from 14. But yeah, for the most part, these were new people. The point that I'm trying to make here is that for the past 20 years, we really haven't had a Final Fantasy mainline team really making two of these things in a row. If you don't count the sequels like 13-2 or Lightning Returns, if we simply focus on the mainline numbered titles, no team has essentially worked on a Final Fantasy game twice in a row. Twice at all, really. There is no consistency, really, in the people who have been working on Final Fantasies, like, at all. And one thing that can be said about the golden era of Final Fantasy is that you did have a fairly consistent roster of people who were working on the same titles, and they'd be working on multiple titles in a row. You know, Kitase would work on Final Fantasy VI, 7, 8, and 10. That is a pretty consecutive streak. And each time they would make those titles, they would learn a lot, right? They would learn how to build on the type of game that they were trying to make. They'd come out and then they'd make something even better. And that's a huge part of what was responsible for that golden era. Because not only does the team get better at making games, they also don't have to start over every single time that they do. Part of the reason that this is because Square is constantly rotating staff. Once a project is finished, they rotate that staff off and then you're relocated to work on something else. But when that happens, you're not using the same consistent technology. And the problem with that is that, like, if you get proficient in using Unreal, and then let's just say you get pulled off of Final Fantasy VII Remake and then you got sent to work on like Final Fantasy XVI, which is using its own proprietary engine, well, now you have to spend that time relearning the engine, relearning how you even do your job in the first place. And all of that has to be done before they can get any kind of return on investment on you and have you contributing valuable code, assets, etc. And so this idea of keeping teams together is part of what the industry needs right now. We're in this era of mass layoffs, teams typically aren't staying together, and then you have a lot of what I described at Square Enix, where, you know, a lot of the times after teams complete a game, even if that project is successful, they still don't necessarily stay together. And I think whenever you look at another one of the company's big successes, Final Fantasy XIV, I think a big reason for a lot of FF14 success is because Creative Studio 3 has stayed together over the years, and they've learned how to build up this very consistent experience with their own consistent flavor to how they make their games. And that's resulted in a really successful continued experience. I do firmly believe that, especially after playing Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, that the FF7 team is probably the best internal developer at Square Enix at the moment. And I absolutely do want to see this team stay together, and I want to see them working on Final Fantasy XVII. Now, as Hamaguchi says in the interview, he doesn't really know what their next project could be. He says that it could be the next numbered Final Fantasy or a completely different brand. I am hoping that it is the next numbered Final Fantasy to an extent. I think that if he is going to work on it, I would hope that it would be Final Fantasy 18 and not 17. The reason that I say it would likely be Final Fantasy 18 is because I would hope that Final Fantasy 17 is already in development. If FF17 isn't in development right now, that would mean that we're not looking at, you know, a released FF17 until like 2030, which is incredibly far away, and honestly, it could be even further than that, considering how long AAA dev times are. One of the reasons that they cited for why Rebirth took so much less time has been specifically cited because they kept the team together, they kept using the same tech, and they were able to roll that over into the next project, and it made things go along much faster. This is something I'm excited about, and I hope continues to be the case. Final Fantasy 13, 15, and 16 all use their own proprietary engine. And of course, the result of that is you have to make the engine first, and then you have to make the game. Problem here is that takes a lot of time, and making a game is already time consuming as it is. Then there's all kinds of technical issues that could go wrong with it, and you can see how this just ends up costing more time and more money. At the end of Final Fantasy VII Re-Trilogy Part 3, they're going to know how they want to implement a world map and what a world map looks like for them. They're going to have a functional airship as well as code for a functional airship and a design like for how that works. They're going to have a functional ATB system with party members, and all this stuff is things that Final Fantasy fans have been desperately asking to all return for like the past 2 decades. They're going to have code, assets, design patterns, everything that can be employed to make the next game fairly fast. They'll already have the team synergy, the engine. This is something that is very, very good for Final Fantasy. And it's the exact thing that I want to see. So again, while he says it could be a completely different brand or whatever, I hope that it is the next numbered Final Fantasy. And I hope we don't have to wait long for it. And even if somebody is working on 17, I hope that they are still taking the lessons from Trilogy and seeing what fans want and making that next big epic title in the franchise. But again, I would not be opposed to having a new IP. If you would have asked me a year ago, would I prefer to have Metaphor ReFantazio or would I prefer to have Persona 6? I probably would have told you I want Persona 6. And then Metaphor came out, and now I'm like, between that, I'd rather have Metaphor 2 maybe over Persona 6. But these are just my thoughts on it, and leave a comment below letting me know yours. Is this something that you are excited about? Be sure to check out Instant Gaming, and I'll see you all in the next video. Later, guys.